This number has been bugging me for a while. In the entire history of video games that have been rated on Metacritic, which goes back to 1995 with Full Throttle, only one game has managed to attain an average critic score of 99. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. A game that actually came out before the site even launched in 2001, which means this number is the result of a retroactive collection of review scores, as is second place on this list Soul Calibur, which launched in 1999. Just a single game post-Metacritic launch has managed to hit the 98 mark with GTA 4 in 2008, and besides that it starts getting down to multi-game ties for 97, 96, and so on. That means in the nearly 27 years since Ocarina of Time's release, no other game has managed to match or overtake its standing as the greatest game of all time, as scored by the largest and most widely referenced review aggregate site in games history. Now, whether or not you actually agree with that placement is kind of irrelevant to this video, but something I've always been curious about is whether or not another game will actually hit that 99 overall score ever again. Not that it would make the game better than if it was sitting at a 98, but just for science, you know? I was curious if we'd ever see it happen, and after looking into it for a while, I think I have my answer. No. As long as the rules stay the same, I believe no game will ever get a 99 on Metacritic ever again. Let me explain why. The first thing we have to address is that Metacritic works on a whole number system, whole numbers in between 0 and 100, with reviews that don't follow that exact format being converted to it. That means a 99 doesn't necessarily have to mean 99 on the dot, likely there's some rounding going on here, and there is. If you average the 22 reviews that add up to this overall score with 18 perfect hundreds, a 98, a 95, a 94, and a 90, you get 98.95, which seems pretty reasonable to round up to a 99. In fact, I feel like the general public would agree that anything above a 0.5 should be rounded up to the nearest whole number, and anything below a 0.5 should be rounded down. You know, standard rules apply here, and if you had to guess, you'd probably assume that's what Metacritic does. But that's not actually true. If we take another example like NFL 2K1, which has a Metacritic score of 97, yeah, that's real, and average out the scores that add up to that number, we actually get 96.27, which most people would probably round down to a 96. So that kind of gives credence to the idea that Metacritic employs an always round up policy, where even a 98.01 could technically qualify as a 99, and while that might be a strange way of handling it, as long as it's consistent, it's really more of a strange quirk to the site than anything. But if you do a little bit more digging, you'll notice that the system is much weirder than an unorthodox rounding method. For example, Virtua Fighter 4 has a 94 on Metacritic, but in calculating its actual average, it comes out to a 92.86. Full Throttle, which is, like I said, the earliest game rated on this site, comes out to an 86 with 8 reviews, but actually averages an 84.125, which means that it's been adjusted by almost 2 full points. And even the two runner-ups to Ocarina of Time, Soul Calibur and GTA 4, actually both average 97.16. The reason why is that Metacritic actually runs on a weighted average system, where critics they believe have a more solid reputation actually matter more to the score than those that don't, which, personally, I think is beyond stupid. First of all, the fact that there's absolutely zero transparency in not only which outlets are given higher weights, but also how much the weighting difference actually is, feels sketchy. And second, I don't know, maybe this is just me, but I feel like you should either be reputable enough to be included, or not reputable enough and therefore not allowed to be an official critic on the site. Metacritic is supposed to be curating which outlets and individuals are allowed as official critics on Metacritic, a process that's also weirdly secretive and unclear, by the way. So why are there tiers of reputability when you can just turn away anyone you don't think is legit? If I go through all the proper channels and become an official critic, why should my vote matter 0.8 times as much as IGN? This all creates a system where you can never be sure which random variables are being adjusted and whose score matters the most. And while that's not like the end of the world or anything, considering scores inform consumer purchases, and they're also sometimes tied to bonuses for developers, which is a whole other can of worms, I feel like there should be more information on how this all works. Either way, the weighting system doesn't actually stop a game from reaching a 99 overall, it just makes understanding how to get there a little bit more confusing. Actually, if anything, it seems to boost scores most of the time, which makes that number even more achievable. But something that definitely does create a lot of problems is the sheer volume of reviews for modern games. Remember how I said the Ocarina of Time score was the result of 22 total critic reviews? If you open up something more recent like Astrobot, that number jumps to 135. Anywhere between 75 and 150 is pretty standard for major AAA releases, and while indie games do lean lower, UFO 50 from last year for example only has 19 scored reviews, because major outlets are less likely to review the game, it hurts its chances at getting more highly weighted entries in comparison to the lower ones, which is at least partially why most of Metacritic's top lists end up being big budget games, despite indies often being critical darlings year in and year out. Again, this whole system is stupid and I hate it. That larger number of critics is important to note for a few reasons. One, you're obviously getting a wider set of opinions here, and the wider the set, the more scattered those opinions end up being. Two, there's way less control from Metacritic themselves. Like I said earlier, both Ocarina of Time and Soul Calibur were aggregated multiple years after release, with a very strict selection process and one that could easily have ignored outlets which gave the game lower scores. But now that hundreds of critics have been verified, it's the Wild West out there, which is technically a good thing because Metacritic already seem to be inputting way too much of their own opinions in this whole process as is, but if we're talking strictly about trying to accumulate great scores and maybe shiftily ignore some of the stuff that doesn't fit that mold, Ocarina of Time has a huge leg up on anything coming out today, especially since by Metacritic's own admission, some of the critics that are allowed to submit reviews for new games haven't earned the same reputation as some of the more trusted reviewers of the last 30 years. And the third reason this larger critic base is important is that the higher that number goes, the farther a game averaging even a 97 or a 98 is from actually pushing over to a 99. Because while it might seem like a game like Grand Theft Auto 4 or even Breath of the Wild is close to matching Ocarina, and if a couple more positive reviews had popped up, it would have actually had them hit that golden number, these scores really don't tell the full story of how massive of a gap this is to make up. Let's assume for a second that there's no weighting system or rounding system, and these games are all just averaging the exact numbers they are on screen. I know the actual math would be a little bit more complicated, but since the algorithm seems to change on literally a case-by-case basis, this is the best we're gonna do. How many more reviews would these games need to bring their current overall scores to a 99? If we took a game like Soul Calibur, which has 24 reviews to the tune of a 98 overall score, we would need a total of 24 more perfect 100 out of 100 scores in addition to what it has now. That's more additional perfect scores than the total amount of reviews for Ocarina of Time, on top of the 14 perfect scores that Soul Calibur already has. GTA 4, which has 48 perfect scores, would need 86 more people to be verified, allowed to add to its Metacritic score, and all willing to give it nothing but hundreds in order to move it up a single number overall. Not to mention, these scores probably wouldn't have the same reputation as an IGN or a GameSpot and would be weighed lower, making the true number of additional perfect reviews necessary to hit that goal completely unknown, but likely over 100. And we can't even rely on the fact that it's really pushing deep into 98 range and is actually on the edge of a 99, because by all accounts, it's the opposite. It's likely just scraping by into this score. Breath of the Wild you can completely forget. It would need 218 more perfect scores and not a single other blemish to pass that hurdle, despite being one of only 4 games post-2010 to even hit the 97 mark. You combine those factors along with the trend of reviewers becoming less granular with their scores, with most rating on a non-decimal 10-point or even 5-point scale, which really increases variance between scores, and I truly think achieving a score of 99 on Metacritic is impossible to hit. And of course, the natural argument to this is that maybe these games just aren't as good as Ocarina of Time was, and they each have major issues that caused some friction for some people, be it Red Dead 2's slow burn and dated shooting, GTA 4's occasional regression from prior entries, or Breath of the Wild's breakable weapons and lack of story presence. If those things were patched up, who knows, maybe you don't get some of these scores on the bottom end and they can really make up ground that way. But I think it's a lot to ask for a game to not only be revolutionary, but also polished to such a pristine degree that you can't poke any holes in it whatsoever. And for it to feel that way for not just one person, but the overwhelming majority of critics who have their own rating systems and preferences, there's just no way to check all those boxes. So, no. No other game will ever hit a 99 on Metacritic for as long as we live. I'm standing on this. Feel free to make fun of me if it actually happens. I'll deserve it. Maybe GTA 6 comes out this year and instantly proves me wrong. Who knows? But maybe the bigger question we should be asking is, why are we still using Metacritic as the gold standard, even in industry, for bonuses, when it's as shady and confusing as it is? Every single score on Metacritic is technically an elaborate lie, and yet we still trust it. I don't know. Anyways, go watch this video on my main channel about games about death. It's good, I promise. Bye.